I'm not taking your brat with me. He'll mess up my entire car. Get out, shouted my mother-in-law, pushing me and my fading child out of the car right on the highway. My husband silently turned away, saying nothing. That evening, when they returned home, they froze in horror at what they saw. Sarah woke up at 6:30 in the morning to the sound of a dripping faucet in the kitchen. Outside the window of their two-room apartment in the city center, dawn was barely breaking. She stretched and felt for the empty space beside her. John had already left for the factory. He worked as a mechanic in 3 shifts, and today was an early one. From the children's room came rustling and quiet murmurs. Marcus, her 6-year-old son, was already awake, tinkering with his building set. The boy had inherited her love of exact sciences and could spend hours assembling complex models of robots or spaceships. Sarah got up, threw on a robe, and walked to the kitchen. The apartment had been left to her by her grandmother Rose 3 years ago. The old lady had spent her life teaching mathematics at a technical school and had managed to buy a flat in the heart of the city. When Sarah inherited it, she felt safe. Finally, she and Marcus had a real home. She put the kettle on and opened the fridge. On the shelf lay a note from John. "Darling, I grabbed some sausages for breakfast. I'll be home late tonight. Mom asked me to help with some furniture. Kisses. J." Sarah frowned. Emily, her mother-in-law, had recently been demanding more and more attention from her son. Sometimes it was moving a wardrobe, sometimes fixing a faucet, sometimes going to the country house to get potatoes. John never refused his mother, even when he and Sarah had plans for the weekend. "Mom, where's Daddy John?" Marcus asked, appearing in the kitchen with messy hair, holding a robot he had assembled. "At work, sweetheart." "Want some omelet?" "Yes." "Can I show my robot how you cook?" Sarah smiled. Marcus loved inventing stories about his robots and talking to them as if they were real friends. After his divorce from his biological father, the boy had taken a long time to adjust to a new man in the house, but John was patient and gradually became almost like a parent to him. While her son ate breakfast, Sarah got ready for work. Teaching English at the private academy school brought in a decent income, especially compared to public schools. The principal appreciated her professionalism and her ability to handle difficult teenagers. The school day passed as usual. Sarah taught 6 lessons, checked tests, and stayed until 7 in the evening for a parent-teacher meeting. When she finally got home, the lights were on, but it was quiet. "Marcus, I'm home," she called, taking off her shoes in the hallway. "Mom, we're here." Her son answered from the living room. Sarah walked into the room and saw Marcus sitting on the carpet in front of the TV. Next to him was Emily. Her mother-in-law was dressed in her usual brown suit. Her hair was neatly styled in the same way she hadn't changed for 15 years. "Hello, Sarah," Emily greeted coldly, not taking her eyes off the screen. "Good evening." "Where's John?" "He's in the shower. We've been moving furniture all day. My boy's tired." Sarah felt a slight irritation at the words "my boy" but stayed silent. Emily often spoke about her 30-year-old son as if he were 12. "Mom, Grandma Emily says her phone broke," Marcus reported, still watching his cartoon. "Yes, imagine that," sighed her mother-in-law. "It just stopped working. Can't even turn it on. And I need my phone for work. The cash register runs through an app." Sarah nodded and went to the kitchen to heat up dinner. A few minutes later, John appeared, fresh from the shower, in sweatpants and a t-shirt. "Hi, darling," he kissed her on the cheek. "How's school?" "Fine. Just tired." "How's furniture moving going?" "Everything's fine. Mom wanted the wardrobe moved to another corner, so we've been at it since morning." They had dinner together. Emily refused to eat, citing a diet. After dinner, the mother-in-law went home, and John helped Marcus assemble a new airplane model. The next day, Sarah decided to wash her husband's jacket. It had stains from yesterday's furniture work. Checking the pockets before washing, she felt something rustling. She pulled out a folded piece of paper and unfolded it. It was a receipt from an electronics store, a latest model phone costing $1,200. The purchase date, yesterday. A chill ran through Sarah. $1,200, that was all their savings for a summer vacation with Marcus. They had planned to go to the seaside. Her son had been dreaming about this trip for 6 months. That evening, after Marcus went to bed, Sarah showed the receipt to John. "Where did this come from?" John blushed and looked away. "I wanted to tell you Mom really needed a phone for work. Her old one completely broke. She couldn't even close her shift. For $1,200, John? You could have bought a decent one for $600. Well, she specifically asked for this one. She says cheap phones break quickly, and this one will last at least 5 years. That's money for Marcus's vacation." "I know, honey. But Mom does so much for us. She looks after our son when we're late, cooks on weekends. She deserved a nice gift." Sarah looked at her husband and realized arguing was useless. John always found a way to justify his mother's actions. And Emily did sometimes help with Marcus, though she did it as if granting an enormous favor. "Next year, we'll definitely go to the sea," John promised. "I'll take extra work." A week later, Sarah met her friend Naomi at a cafe near the school. They had been friends since university, and Naomi was one of the few people Sarah trusted. "You look kind of off," her friend remarked, stirring sugar into her coffee. "Did something happen?" Sarah told her about the phone and their ruined vacation. Naomi listened carefully, then frowned. "Listen, do you know what your mother-in-law says about you?" "What do you mean?" "My neighbor works at the same store as her. She says Emily complains to everyone. She's so cunning. She got pregnant by another man to get child support, and then she hooked my son." Sarah felt her face flush. "She says that?" "Absolutely. And that you trapped him with the apartment. That he married you for the housing, and now you're using him. Marcus is John's child." "I know. But she tells everyone the child isn't his and that you're greedy, not giving him money for his mother." Sarah sat, gripping her cup with both hands. So Emily hadn't just disliked her, she had actively been turning others against her, doing it for a long time, methodically. "Did you tell John?" "Try to hint at it? He doesn't listen. He says Mom worries about him, that's why she sometimes speaks sharply." At home, Sarah tried to talk to her husband about what she had heard. "John, she's telling strangers that Marcus isn't your son." "So what? Biologically, he isn't. But I love him like he is. You don't understand. She's turning people against me." "Enough," John raised his voice. "You're always making drama. Mom's old, lonely. She has no one but me. And you want me to abandon her?" The conversation ended with nothing resolved. John went out to smoke on the balcony, and Sarah went to bed with a heavy sense of loneliness. The following weeks passed in a tense atmosphere. John started staying longer at his mother's, and when he returned home, he was silent and irritable. Sarah focused on work and her son, trying not to think about family problems. One Saturday morning, John announced he was going to his mother's. "Again?" Sarah couldn't help herself. "We plan to go to the park with Marcus. It's important to Mom. She wants to look at a car." "What car?" "Well, she decided to buy herself a car. She's tired of taking buses." Sarah felt a sense of foreboding. "With what money?" "She's just a cashier. She'll take it on credit. I'll help with the down payment." "With what money will you help?" John hesitated. "Well, I have a little saved up." "John, we don't have any extra money. We just spent everything on the phone. We'll manage. I'll do some extra work." On Monday, Sarah learned the truth by accident. Marcus got sick, and she went to the clinic to get a medical certificate. In the queue ahead of her stood a woman loudly talking on the phone about loans and cars. "Can you imagine? My neighbor bought a car," she said. "Took out a loan at the dealership, and her son signed as a guarantor. She says, if anything happens, he'll have to pay." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Could it be that John had signed as a guarantor for his mother's loan without her knowing? That evening, she asked her husband directly. John tried to dodge the question but eventually admitted, "Yeah, I signed." "What's the big deal?" "Mom's careful, she'll pay the loan. Do you realize that if she doesn't pay, the debt will fall on us? She won't not pay. She's always been responsible her whole life. John, this is serious. You should have discussed it with me." "Here you go again," John snapped. "Mom carried everything on her own when my father left. She deserves help. At our expense. At ours. Who else should help their parents?" Sarah realized she was trapped. John made decisions unilaterally, presenting her with fait accompli. And Emily got everything she wanted without considering their family budget. A week later, a red foreign car appeared in their courtyard. Emily had bought a 5-year-old used car in good condition. Loan, $30,000, monthly payment, $2,500. Nice car, Sarah admitted when her mother-in-law came to show off her purchase. "Of course," Emily replied proudly. "I've dreamed of owning a car my whole life. Now I won't have to squeeze into buses with all the bums." Marcus examined the car with interest, but when he asked if he could sit in the driver's seat, his grandmother sharply refused. "No children in the car. You'll break or dirty something." That same evening, Sarah calculated the family expenses. $2,500 for the loan, plus insurance, fuel, and maintenance, almost half of John's salary. Their own plans for apartment repairs and vacation were postponed indefinitely. A month later, problems with Marcus began. At first, the boy complained of stomach pain after breakfast. Sarah thought he simply didn't want to go to kindergarten and paid little attention. But by evening, his condition worsened, he developed a fever, and the pain increased. At night, Marcus barely slept, tossing and turning, crying. In the morning, Sarah called the local doctor. She was an elderly woman with extensive experience, who examined the boy carefully, palpated his abdomen, measured his temperature, listened to his heart. "This looks like acute appendicitis," she said, removing her stethoscope. "He needs to go to the hospital immediately." "Do you have a car?" "No," Sarah replied. "Then call an ambulance or ask someone to drive you." "Regional Children's Hospital, Surgical Department." "You mustn't delay." Sarah saw the doctor out and returned to her son. Marcus lay pale, eyes closed, breathing heavily. "Mommy, it hurts," he whispered. "Soon, sweetheart, we'll go to the doctor, and you'll feel better." She called John at the factory. The foreman said he would pass on the message, but John was on shift until evening. Waiting for an ambulance could take hours. The regional hospital was 30 kilometers from the city. Traveling by public transport with a sick child was risky. There was only one option, Emily with her new car. Sarah dialed her mother-in-law's number, mentally preparing for an unpleasant conversation. "Hello, Emily, this is Sarah. We have a problem," she quickly explained the situation. There was a long silence on the other end. "So what do you want from me?" Emily finally asked. "To take us to the hospital. Marcus is feeling very bad. Why didn't you call an ambulance? The doctor said it's better not to wait. We need to go immediately." Another pause. "Fine," Emily reluctantly agreed. "I'll be there in half an hour. Just make sure the car stays clean. The last thing I need is for the kid to mess up the interior." Sarah felt a sting of resentment but remained silent. Right now, the most important thing was to get to the doctor's. She quickly packed a bag with documents and a change of clothes for her son and dressed Marcus warmly. The boy could barely stand, leaning on her arm. Exactly half an hour later, the red car appeared in the courtyard. Emily got out, walking toward the entrance with a sour expression. "Where's the patient?" Sarah helped Marcus out onto the street. Her mother-in-law gave the grandson a critical look. "Doesn't look very sick. Probably ate too much ice cream yesterday." The doctor suspects appendicitis. "Doctors these days send kids to the hospital for every sneeze," she grumbled, but still let them into the car. Sarah placed her son in the back seat and sat beside him. Emily started the engine and drove out of the yard. "Just don't touch anything," she warned, glancing in the rearview mirror. The car's new, leather interior. Sarah nodded, holding Marcus close. The boy was burning with fever, breathing unevenly. She wanted to get to the hospital as quickly as possible. The car moved slowly through city streets. Emily stopped at every traffic light, let pedestrians cross where she could have driven, and constantly glanced at Marcus in the rearview mirror. "Don't breathe on the windows," she snapped. "I just cleaned them." Sarah gritted her teeth. Every minute of delay could cost her son's health, yet her mother-in-law worried about keeping the car clean. "Could you go a little faster?" she asked. "I'm not some reckless driver." "The car's expensive, I drive carefully." Marcus groaned and pressed closer to his mother. His face had turned ashen, dark circles forming under his eyes. They left the city and drove along the highway toward the regional hospital. Sarah watched the signs, 12 kilometers to go. Emily didn't exceed 60, even though the speed limit was 90. Suddenly, the car slowed and turned onto a dirt road. "Where are we going?" Sarah panicked. "To Stella. She used to work as a nurse, knows all about illnesses. We'll check with her first." "Emily, we need to get to the hospital." The doctor said, "Urgent." Doctors these days rush kids into surgery for every sneeze. "Stella's experienced, 40 years in medicine. She'll know better." Sarah couldn't believe her ears. Instead of taking the sick child to the surgeons, her mother-in-law decided to stop at a friend's for advice. "But we're losing time." "We're not losing anything. Half an hour there and back, and we'll know exactly what's wrong with the boy." The red car bounced along the rutted dirt road. Marcus felt nauseous from the jolt. He grew even paler. "I feel sick," the boy whispered. "Hold on, son, we'll be there soon." 10 minutes later, they stopped at a 2-story private house with carved window frames. Emily got out and headed to the gate. "You stay here, I'll be quick." Sarah stayed in the car with her son. Marcus lay on her lap, breathing heavily. His temperature had clearly risen even more. Through the window, Sarah saw Emily talking for a long time with a heavy-set woman in a floral robe. Stella gestured wildly, pointing at the car and explaining something. Half an hour passed. Sarah was ready to get out and demand they continue immediately when Emily finally returned. "So what did Stella say?" Sarah asked, hoping to hear something sensible. "She says it's most likely just a stomach upset. Take a pill and go home." "How's he supposed to go home?" "They suspect appendicitis. Stella knows better. She says, with appendicitis, the fever goes up to nearly 40. "How high is his?" 38.5. "See? Not appendicitis." Emily started the car and turned back toward the road. But instead of turning toward the hospital, she drove toward the city. "Where are we going?" "Home." "Why the hospital if it's not appendicitis?" "Stop!" Sarah almost shouted. "Turn around. We're going to the doctor's." "Don't yell in the car," her mother-in-law snapped. "Don't fray my nerves. Emily, if something happens to Marcus." "Nothing will happen. At home you'll give him a pill, chamomile tea, and it'll pass." Sarah realized arguing was pointless. Her mother-in-law clearly had no intention of taking them to the hospital. She took out her phone and tried to call John. Maybe he could talk some sense into his mother. The phone was unreachable. Mobile signal was blocked at the factory. Then Sarah called an ambulance. "Hello, this is the emergency service. We need an ambulance. A child with suspected appendicitis. Please give your address." Sarah gave the address of the house they were heading to. "We're on our way. Expect us within 40 minutes. Emily overheard the conversation and frowned. "Why did you call an ambulance?" "I said we treat him at home. Because you refused to take a sick child to the doctors." "I'm not refusing, I'm protecting him from unnecessary procedures. Doctors these days just know how to rip people off." They reached home in 20 minutes. Marcus could barely stand. Sarah supported him under his arms and helped him to the entrance. "Thanks for the ride," she said to her mother-in-law. "Uh-huh. Next time take a taxi instead of bothering people over nothing." Emily drove off, and Sarah carried her son into the apartment and laid him on the sofa. The boy was very weak and complained of severe pain. The ambulance arrived an hour later. The doctor, a young man with a tired face, quickly examined Marcus. "Why did you wait so long?" he asked sternly. "The child shows all signs of acute appendicitis. He should have been brought immediately. We tried," Sarah began to explain, but the medic interrupted. "Get ready. We're taking him to surgery immediately." Marcus was carried on a stretcher to the ambulance. On the way to the hospital, Sarah held her son's hand while the doctor administered a painkiller drip. In the emergency department, the on-duty nurse met them and led them to the surgeon's office. Dr. Griffin, a man in his 50s with attentive eyes, examined the boy and immediately ordered surgery. Appendicitis in an acute stage. A little longer and it would have developed into peritonitis. You arrived just in time. Marcus was taken to the operating room, and Sarah stayed in the corridor to wait. The surgery lasted 2 hours. All that time she paced back and forth, unable to settle. Finally, Dr. Griffin appeared. Everything went well. The appendix was removed, no complications. The boy will be fine. Sarah nearly cried with relief. "Can I see him?" "He's still under anesthesia. He'll wake up in about 3 hours. He'll stay in the ICU for a day for observation, then we'll move him to a regular ward." While Marcus slept in the ICU, Sarah sat in the hospital cafe drinking hot tea. Her hands trembled from the stress. Just a little longer, and the consequences could have been terrible. All because of Emily's stubbornness, thinking she knew better than the doctors what was best for the child. In the evening, John arrived. He looked pale and anxious. "How's Marcus?" he asked, hugging his wife. "The surgery went well. The doctors say he can go home in a week. Thank God. And Mom said you went to Stella, and she said it wasn't anything serious." Sarah looked at her husband in disbelief. "John, your mother almost caused a disaster. She refused to take us to the hospital, wasting time visiting her friend. Well, she only meant well. She didn't want the child to suffer unnecessarily." "Meant well?" "The doctor said that a little longer, and it would have become peritonitis." John was silent for a moment, then hesitantly said, "Mom was worried. People her age sometimes make poor decisions." Sarah realized her husband would once again defend his mother. Even now, when it was a matter of their son's life and health, he couldn't admit that Emily had acted irresponsibly. The next day, Marcus regained consciousness. He was weak, but the doctors said he was recovering well. Sarah barely left his bedside. In the afternoon, a nurse came into the room. "You have visitors." At the door were John and Emily. Her mother-in-law was wearing her best suit and carrying a bag of fruit. "How's our patient?" she asked as if nothing had happened. Marcus saw his grandmother and turned toward the wall. "Marcus, don't be difficult," John said gently. "Grandma Emily brought some fruit." "I don't want fruit," the boy whispered. Emily set the bag on the bedside table and sat in a chair next to the bed. "This is what poor nutrition does," she said, addressing Sarah. "Children are fed all sorts of chemicals nowadays. No wonder they get sick." Sarah silently stared at her mother-in-law. Could this woman really not understand what she had done yesterday? "Stella says a strict diet is needed after surgery," Emily continued. "I told her everything, and she wrote a list of foods." "Thank you, but we'll ask the doctors," Sarah replied coldly. "Doctors nowadays all they know is how to pump kids full of pills, while folk medicine has been proven for centuries." John sat silently, occasionally stroking Marcus's head. The boy didn't respond and continued lying turned away. "We'll be quick," John finally said. "Marcus, get better soon. You'll be home before you know it." When they left, Marcus turned to his mother. "Mom, why didn't Grandma want to take me to the doctor?" Sarah didn't know what to say. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that his grandmother is selfish and cruel? She was probably scared. And Dad John was scared too? "Yes, son." "And you weren't scared?" "No. I knew the doctors would help you." Marcus was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "I want us to live just the two of us. Without Grandma Emily and Dad John." Sarah's heart sank. The child instinctively sensed what was happening in the family. On the third day, Marcus was moved to a regular ward. Sarah stayed by his side, sleeping on a fold-out cot. John came after work, but only for a short time. Emily no longer appeared. On Saturday evening, when Marcus was asleep, Sarah stepped into the corridor for some fresh air. Near the window, 2 women were talking, and one of them seemed familiar. Looking closer, Sarah realized it was Stella, the friend of her mother-in-law they had visited instead of going to the hospital. "She planned everything on purpose," Stella was saying into the phone. "Emily spent a month plotting how to get rid of her daughter-in-law. She says the boy's illness is a perfect excuse to show what a bad mother she is." Sarah froze. "Because of you, the child almost died," Stella continued. "But it turns out she called an ambulance." Emily's angry now, her plan failed. Sarah had heard enough. She quietly returned to the ward and sat next to her sleeping son. So everything had been planned. Emily deliberately wasted time, drove them to her friend, and refused to go to the hospital. She had hoped Marcus's condition would worsen, so she could blame Sarah for neglecting the child. Her mother-in-law was ready to sacrifice her grandson's health just to destroy their family. And John? The cold thought burned Sarah. He must have known about his mother's plans. Otherwise, how could his indifference be explained? She looked at her sleeping son. Marcus looked so vulnerable, with a bandage on his stomach. The doctors had said the surgery had been timely, but just a few more hours of delay could have had irreversible consequences. At that moment, Sarah made a decision, final and irrevocable. She and Marcus would live separately. Without John and his mother. Without people willing to risk a child's health for their selfish goals. The apartment belonged to her. The money in the account, hers too. Her job was stable, and her income sufficient. She could provide everything her son needed. As for John, let him live with his mother and pay for her debts. Let him endure her complaints and fulfill her whims. But without them. Sarah took out her phone and sent a message to her friend Naomi. "Sarah, I need your help. Very urgent." "Naomi, what happened?" "Sarah, I'm divorcing. Kicking out my husband. I'll explain everything tomorrow." "Naomi, okay. How can I help?" "Sarah, need a good lawyer and a locksmith to change the locks." "Naomi, consider it done. Hang in there." Sarah put away her phone and looked at her son again. Marcus was smiling slightly in his sleep. He was probably dreaming something nice. And she had to make sure that nice dream became reality for both of them. Tomorrow, she would start a new life. Without betrayal, without humiliation, without people willing to harm a child for their own interests. Sarah took Marcus's hand and held it tightly. The boy didn't wake up but pressed closer to her hand. But first, she had to survive the most terrifying day of her life. At the hospital exit, John and Emily were waiting. Sarah was surprised. She hadn't called them about the discharge. "We decided to meet you," John explained, hugging his wife and son. "How did you know we were being discharged?" "I called the ward," Emily answered. "Wanted to check on my grandson." Marcus was still weak after surgery, moving with difficulty. "The doctors recommended bed rest at home and a follow-up check in a week." "I brought the car," her mother-in-law announced. "I'll drive you." "Thank you," Sarah said, seating her son in the back. Marcus was pale and complained of weakness. The drive home took half an hour. Emily drove carefully, avoiding potholes and puddles. "How are you feeling?" she asked, looking in the rearview mirror at her grandson. "Fine," the boy whispered. Suddenly, Marcus began to feel nauseous. First, he turned pale and pressed against his mother, then vomited right in the car. Sarah tried to hold the bag under him, but it was too late. The seat and floor were soiled. Emily slammed on the brakes at the roadside. "What is this?" she shouted, turning around. "I told you he wasn't feeling well," Sarah said, wiping her son's mouth with a napkin. "Is this normal after surgery?" "Normal?" her mother-in-law shrieked. "He ruined my entire interior." She got out of the car and threw open the back door. "I'm not taking your brat anywhere. He's going to ruin my car." "Get out." Her mother-in-law grabbed Sarah's arm, trying to pull her out of the car. "Mom, stop," John said quietly, without conviction. "I won't stop." "New car, leather interior." "I didn't take out a loan for this," she jabbed a finger at Marcus, "to be ruined." Emily yanked Sarah's sleeve hard. Holding her sick son, Sarah couldn't resist. "Get out." Her mother-in-law screamed. "John?" Sarah called to her husband. He sat in the front seat, head down, silently turned to the window, saying nothing. Emily forced Sarah, with her weakening child, out of the car onto the highway. Marcus could barely stand, leaning on his mother. "Mom, I'm cold," he whispered. Sarah took off her jacket and wrapped her son in it. They stood on the roadside of a busy road as the red car roared away. 10 minutes later, an ambulance driving to a call in a nearby village picked them up. The paramedic, seeing a woman with a sick child on the road, stopped. "What happened?" "We were taking my son from the hospital. He got sick on the way. They left us here." "They left a sick child on the highway?" The medic couldn't believe it. "Get in, we'll take you to the city." On the way, Sarah made a final decision. No one would ever treat her son like that again. Tomorrow she would file for divorce and evict John from the apartment. No one would ever again be in their lives who was willing to harm Marcus for selfish reasons. "Everything will be fine soon," she whispered to her son. "Mom promises." The next morning, after returning from the hospital, Sarah woke with a clear mind and firm determination. Marcus was sleeping in his room, recovering from surgery. John had left for work before dawn, without even attempting to explain his behavior from yesterday. Sarah took out her phone and dialed Anthony Gibson, her former university classmate. They had studied together in the Faculty of Foreign Languages, but he transferred to law after the 3rd year. Now Anthony worked at a prestigious law firm specializing in family cases. "Sarah, what a surprise. How are you?" "Not great." "Anthony, I need your help. I'm divorcing." "Seriously? I thought everything was fine with you." "Let's meet and discuss." "Can today work?" "Is it urgent?" "Of course. Come to the office in about 2 hours." Sarah left Marcus with a neighbor, an elderly woman who often helped with the child. The boy was still weak and mostly sleeping, but the doctor said his recovery was going well. The law firm's office was in the city center, in a beautiful old building. Anthony met her in a spacious office overlooking the main square. "Tell me what happened," he said, seating Sarah in a comfortable chair. Sarah recounted the entire situation, from the phone and car purchase to yesterday's incident on the highway. Anthony listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "I understand," he said finally. "Let's break it down point by point. The apartment is registered to whom?" "To me. I inherited it from my grandmother 3 years ago." "Excellent. So there will be no problem with housing. John only has usage rights as a family member, which end after the divorce. How quickly can I evict him?" "With solid grounds, quite quickly. And we have grounds. Leaving a sick child on the highway is serious." Anthony took out a notebook and started taking notes. "Now about the car loan. Did you sign a guarantor agreement?" "No. John arranged everything himself." "Then the bank has no right to demand payment from you." "But we need to check the documents. If John listed you as a guarantor without your consent, that's document forgery." "Can anything be done about the loan?" "Yes. If we prove there was no consent, the bank will reconsider the terms, and without a guarantor, John might not be able to pay." Sarah felt a plan forming inside her, not cruel or vengeful, but fair and legal. "What do I need to do?" "First, gather the documents, a hospital certificate on the child's condition, proof of your apartment ownership, all paperwork on the loan. Then we'll file for divorce and eviction." "How long will this take?" "With serious grounds, a month to a month and a half. But the process can be accelerated with evidence of the respondent's inappropriate behavior." Anthony looked at her carefully. "Sarah, are you sure?" "Divorce is a serious step." "Absolutely sure. After what they did to Marcus, I can no longer trust them." "Okay. Then let's start acting." They arranged a meeting the next day with a full set of documents. Sarah returned home feeling relieved. Finally, she had begun taking action. Marcus woke up and asked for food. Sarah made him a light soup, as recommended by the doctors. The boy was still weak, but his appetite had returned. "Mom, when will Dad John come?" "I don't know, son. He works a lot. And Grandma Emily won't be visiting us anymore." "Why do you ask?" "I don't want her to come. She's bad." Sarah stroked her son's head. "Children always sense falsehood and cruelty better than adults." John came home late in the evening. He was gloomy and tired, barely greeting anyone. At dinner, he sat in silence, avoiding his wife's eyes. "How's Marcus feeling?" he finally asked. "Better. The doctor said the recovery is going well." "Good." Sarah had been expecting him to apologize for yesterday or at least try to explain himself. But John remained silent, as if nothing had happened. "John, we need to talk." "About what?" "About what happened yesterday." He looked up at her with irritation. "Mom apologized. She said she got nervous because of the car. She apologized to me. Well, she told me, asked me to pass it on. But what do you think about it?" John got up from the table and began clearing the dishes. "I think it's not worth making a mountain out of a molehill. The car is really new. Mom's worried. John, she left a sick child on the roadside. She didn't leave him, she dropped him off. The city wasn't far, 10 kilometers along the highway with a child after surgery. So what now? It happened. But Marcus is healthy." Sarah realized the conversation was pointless. John either didn't see anything wrong with his mother's actions or didn't want to see it. "I'm filing for divorce," she said calmly. John froze, holding the plates. "What? Did I hear you right? Over yesterday?" "Sarah, Have you gone crazy? I'm completely sane and no longer want to live with someone who doesn't protect their family. I am protecting them. I just don't see the point in arguing with my mom over nonsense. Nonsense? John, your mother could have caused Marcus serious harm. She could have, but she didn't. Everything ended well. No, it didn't end. For me, it's only just beginning. John put the dishes in the sink and turned to his wife. Sarah, let's not rush. Think it over carefully. I already have. What about the apartment? The loans? I guaranteed my mom's car. That's your problem. You have nothing to do with the apartment. John turned pale. So you're kicking me out? Exactly. And where am I supposed to live? Not my concern. You can move in with your mom. They argued for a long time, but Sarah was firm. John tried to persuade, threaten, promise to change, but she listened distantly, already mentally planning the next day. The next morning, while John was at work, Sarah went to Anthony with the documents. The lawyer carefully reviewed all the papers. Excellent, he said. The apartment is completely yours. No disputes. The loan is also clear. Your signature isn't on the guarantee contract. So the bank can't hold me responsible? No. Moreover, you can file a complaint against the bank for wrongfully including you in the contract without your consent. Could this create problems for John? Absolutely. The bank will demand an immediate revision of the loan terms, and without a guarantor, the interest rate will rise by 1.5 times. Anthony began preparing documents for court. Sarah signed the divorce petition and the claim to evict John from the apartment. Now for the interesting part, the lawyer said. Do you have any information about your mother-in-law's income or how she lives? Why? If she takes loans, she must declare some income. But cashiers at grocery stores don't earn much. Maybe she has undeclared income? Sarah thought for a moment. Indeed, where did Emily get the money for the loans? A cashier's salary is $2,000, but the monthly car payment is $2,500. I'll talk to my friend, she said. Her neighbor worked at the same store. That evening, Sarah called Naomi and asked her to find out more about Emily's job. Her friend promised to get every detail. John came home late, in an aggressive mood. Are you serious about kicking me out? He asked from the doorway. Absolutely serious. And Marcus? Will you also take away his father? Marcus has a biological father. And you showed you were ready to betray the child for the sake of your mother? I didn't betray anyone. I sat silently while your mother left a sick son on the roadside. I didn't know what she would do. You knew and stayed silent. That's called complicity. John paced the room, nervously smoking, then stopped and looked at his wife. If you file for divorce, I'll take some action too. For example, I'll sue for child support, for Marcus's upkeep. Sarah smirked. He's not your biological son. You can only claim support if you've officially adopted him. I'll adopt him. Too late. After the divorce, the court won't allow adoption without the mother's consent. John realized he had lost. He had no rights to Marcus, to the apartment, no rights to anything in this house. He cursed and went to his room. The next day, Naomi called back with some interesting news. Listen, your mother-in-law is quite something, always complaining, she said. My neighbor told me something. What exactly? She's been stealing from the store for years, taking groceries home, taking money from the register. The manager knows but covers for her. She's his childhood friend. Seriously? Absolutely. My neighbor says the whole shift knows, but they stay silent. They're afraid of being fired too. How much does she take? According to my neighbor, about $500, plus groceries. So it's quite a boost to her salary. Sarah wrote down all the information. Now it was clear where Emily got the money for her loans. Naomi, can this be verified somehow? Yes. The retail chain has a security service. They conduct surprise inspections, but someone has to tip them off. Anonymously? Of course. There's a hotline. Sarah noted the security service hotline. Now she had a serious weapon against her mother-in-law. But first, she had to deal with John. Anthony worked quickly. Within a week, the court accepted the divorce petition for review. 3 days later, John received an eviction notice. Are you completely crazy? He lashed out at his wife. Where am I supposed to go? To your mom. She has a one-room apartment. Not my problem. Sarah, think it over. We're a family. We were a family. Until yesterday, John tried to win Marcus over to his side. Marcus, you don't want me to leave, right? The boy looked at him with serious eyes. Yes, I do. You're bad. When I was in pain, you didn't tell Grandma anything. I'm going to my mom, and we'll live on our own. John realized even the child was against him. He packed his things and went to his mother's. Sarah felt an enormous relief. Finally, the house was peaceful. Marcus recovered quickly, playing with his building blocks and laughing again. But the most interesting part was yet to come. 2 weeks later, Sarah called the retail chain security hotline. Good afternoon. I want to report violations at one of your stores. I'm listening carefully. Store number 47. Cashier Emily systematically steals groceries and money from the register. Manager Baker covers for her. What are your suspicions based on? I work in a neighboring building and often shop there. I've seen her put groceries in her bag without scanning them. Colleagues also told me about the money. Thank you for the information. We will conduct an investigation. I want to remain anonymous. Of course, your details will not be disclosed. Sarah hung up, feeling a sense of duty fulfilled. Justice had to prevail. She also filed a complaint with the bank about being wrongfully included in the guarantee contract. The credit institution responded quickly, demanding that John immediately repay the debt or provide a new guarantor. Panic set in for John. He called Sarah several times, asking for leniency, but she refused. These are your problems, she said calmly. Handle it yourself. Emily tried to take out a new loan to cover the old one, but the banks refused. Her cashier's salary didn't allow her to borrow a large amount. The store audit started unexpectedly for everyone. In the morning, a team of auditors from the head office arrived and demanded a full inventory check. Sarah learned about it from Naomi, whose neighbor worked at the same store. Can you imagine the chaos? Her friend recounted. They checked all the registers, the stockroom, documents, and found a shortage. How much? Over $10,000 in cash and $5,000 in groceries over the last 6 months. And then, all suspicious employees were fired. Manager Baker was removed from his position. Your mother-in-law was also dismissed. They say they'll file a police report as well. Sarah felt satisfaction. Emily got what she deserved. But the most interesting thing happened a month later. In the evening, there was a knock at the door. Sarah opened it and saw John and Emily. They looked disheveled and confused. Can we come in? John asked. No, Sarah, we need to talk. About nothing. Mom had been fired from her job. They say she was stealing money. That's not true. She worked honestly. Sarah looked at Emily. Her mother-in-law stood with her head down. All her former aggressiveness had vanished. Let her prove her innocence in court, Sarah spoke up. Emily, can I apologize to Marcus? It's too late. I really didn't mean it. I just got nervous because of the car. Did they take the car? John nodded. The bank is demanding full repayment of the loan. We don't have that kind of money. That's unfortunate. Sarah, Maybe you could help? As a guarantor? I'm not a guarantor. The bank confirmed that. But we're family. We were. Until you left my son on the roadside. That's when family ended. That evening, when they returned home, they froze in horror at what they saw. Sarah learned about it the next day from her neighbor. Can you imagine? The elderly woman recounted. They approached the entrance, and their bags were still there. It turns out they'd been evicted from the apartment, and the locks were changed. How is that possible? The court bailiffs came with the enforcement order. Your John didn't even resist. He looked at the papers and realized there was nothing he could do. And where did they go? They moved to a dormitory and rented a room. No work, and John earns alone at the factory. They couldn't afford an apartment. Sarah felt calm satisfaction. Justice had prevailed. Marcus quickly forgot about John and Emily. He was busy with a new building set his mother had bought him. The boy constructed robots and gave them names. Sarah wasn't bored either. She had plenty of work, stable income, and without John's loan obligations, life was much easier. 3 months later, she was offered a job at a prestigious international school. The salary was twice as high, with a benefits package and the opportunity for overseas training. Mom, are we rich? Marcus asked when she told him about the new job. No, son, but we're doing well. And John and Emily's grandma, are they rich too? No. They're having difficulties. They brought it on themselves. Yes, son, everyone is responsible for their actions. Marcus nodded and returned to his building set, assembling a complex model of a spaceship. Sarah watched her son and thought how fortunate it was that she had found the strength to change their lives. Now Marcus was growing up in an environment of honesty and fairness, free from people who could harm him. 6 months later, Sarah happened to run into John and Emily at the clinic. She had brought Marcus for a routine checkup with the surgeon to see how his surgical scar was healing. John had aged noticeably over the months. His hair had grayed, and his face looked gaunt. He sat in the corridor next to his mother, waiting for his turn with the therapist. Emily looked even worse. She leaned on a cane and struggled to breathe. Apparently, the stress from her firing and the legal proceedings had taken a toll on her health. Marcus spotted them first. Mom, he whispered, hiding behind her. Is that them? Yes, son, don't be afraid, we'll just walk past. But John noticed them. He stood up and hesitantly stepped forward. Sarah, Marcus. Sarah stopped. Hello, John. How are you? How's our son? All is well. And you? John lowered his eyes. Mom is ill. Her blood pressure fluctuates, her heart is failing. I'm sorry to hear that. Sarah, can I see Marcus sometimes? Sarah looked at her son. The boy held her hand tightly and shook his head. I don't want to, Marcus said quietly. Did you hear that? Sarah replied to John. But I was almost a father to him. Fathers don't betray their children. John wanted to say something more, but Emily touched his sleeve. John, let's go. They're calling us. They went into the doctor's office, and Sarah and Marcus headed to the surgeon. Mom, do you feel sorry for them? The boy asked along the way. No, son, I don't gloat, but I don't feel sorry either. They chose their path, and we chose ours. And yes, I think we chose correctly. Marcus nodded and smiled. I like our life. Me too, sunshine. The surgeon examined the boy and was pleased with the results. The scar had healed perfectly, with no complications. A healthy, strong boy, the doctor said. Forget about this surgery. Live a normal life. As Sarah left the clinic, she felt light and calm. The frightening period of their lives was behind them. Ahead lay only good things. Marcus ran alongside her, excitedly talking about the new robot he wanted to build at home. You know, Mom, I've thought of a name for him. What is it? Justice. He will protect good people from bad ones. Sarah smiled. Her son was growing up with the right understanding of good and evil. That was the most important thing. They boarded the bus and went home to their cozy apartment, where no one could hurt them anymore, where they could live peacefully, work, raise their child, and enjoy every day. Meanwhile, somewhere in a dormitory on the outskirts of the city, John and Emily were paying for their actions. Each received what they deserved. Justice had truly prevailed.